Mr. Mitchell, that tacky statue violates our aesthetic standards and it's coming down today. Karen Whitmore stood on my driveway, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against a clipboard while two other board members flanked her like bodyguards. I don't care what sob story you think justifies it. I glanced down at the cease and desist letter she'd just shoved into my hands, then back at her smug face. You know, Karen, I spend 40 hours a week reviewing municipal code violations and improper legal documentation. I folded the letter slowly, deliberately. This isn't properly formatted according to state HOA statute requirements. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. The confidence in Karen's eyes flickered for just a moment before she recovered. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but I'm the HOA president and I'm James Mitchell, municipal code inspector for the county. I kept my voice calm, professional. I've been reviewing legal documents and municipal compliance issues since before you moved to Pinewood Estates. I reached out and touched the bronze dove statue sitting quietly in my front garden bed, all 18 inches of it, catching the last rays of sunset. This memorial has every right to be here, and your authority to remove it. I let the words hang in the air. Well, that's more questionable than you might think. Karen's face flushed red. I don't care what your job is. HOA rules are HOA rules, and that eyesore goes, or you'll be facing daily fines until... This eyesore, I interrupted, is a memorial to my brother Marcus, Marine Corps, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines. He was killed by an IED in Afghanistan 3 years ago. My hand remained steady on the dove's bronze wing. Marcus used to say doves reminded him of home, of peace. He wrote about it in his last deployment letter. The silence stretched between us. Even Karen's backup seemed uncomfortable now. I installed this statue on the anniversary of his death, I continued. Not as decoration, not as some aesthetic choice, but because touching this bronze helps me deal with the PTSD from losing my little brother overseas. It's part of my healing process, recommended by my VA therapist. Karen shifted her weight, but her jaw remained set. That's very sad, Mr. Mitchell, but rules are rules. Personal circumstances don't override community standards. The board voted unanimously. Did they? I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of her cease and desist letter, because I'm curious about a few things, like whether your board followed proper notification procedures, whether this statute you're citing actually exists in your bylaws, whether your HOA even has the legal standing to enforce aesthetic violations. One of her board members whispered something in her ear. Karen's nostrils flared. You have 72 hours, Mr. Mitchell. Remove it voluntarily or face $500 in immediate fines plus $50 daily until compliance. We can also place a lien on your property. She turned on her heel. And all the municipal knowledge in the world won't help you fight legitimate HOA authority. As their car pulled away, I stood there in the gathering dusk, my hand still resting on Marcus's dove. The bronze felt warm from the day's heat, solid and real. Marcus had written about doves in that last letter, how they made him think of coming home, of the peace he'd find when his deployment ended. He never made it home, but this memorial brought him back to me every day. I looked down at Karen's letter again, noting the formatting errors, the improper legal citations, the overreach of authority that my trained eye caught immediately. She had no idea who she was messing with. Where are you watching from? Because Karen Whitmore just picked a fight with someone who knows exactly how HOA legal documents should look, and hers don't look right at all. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's attack on my dove memorial wasn't isolated. After my coffee, I decided to walk through Pinewood Estates and see what other violations she'd been documenting. 3 houses down, Mrs. Chen was kneeling in her front yard, pulling weeds from what used to be the most beautiful rose garden in the neighborhood. I'd always admired how she'd arranged the roses in a perfect heart shape. Morning, Mrs. Chen, gardens looking... different. She looked up, her eyes watery behind thick glasses. Oh, James, the HOA made me remove my roses last month. Said they were non-conforming landscaping. Her voice cracked. Those were memorial roses for my husband. Each variety represented a year of our marriage. 43 roses total. I felt my chest tighten. They made you remove a memorial garden? Karen said personal memorials weren't allowed unless pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Mrs. Chen struggled to her feet, brushing dirt from her knees. But when I submitted the paperwork, she rejected it. Said memorial gardens created precedent for other emotional exceptions. I helped steady her arm. Did she give you the same 72-hour ultimatum? Worse, she threatened to fine me $50 per rose per day until I removed them all. At my age, on my fixed income, Mrs. Chen shook her head. I couldn't afford to fight it. Walking further down Maple Street, the pattern became clear. The Johnson family's small military flag display, gone. The Martinez family's hand-painted address sign that their kids had made, replaced with a standard black mailbox number. The Williams family's decorative garden stones, spelling out their family, by name, removed. Every missing item told a story. Every empty space represented someone's surrender to Karen's systematic campaign. At the corner of Oak and Pine, I spotted Karen herself, clipboard in hand, photographing the Henderson house. She was documenting their front porch wind chimes, the same wind chimes I'd heard tinkling peacefully for the past 2 years. I hung back, watching her work. She snapped multiple angles, made notes, checked something against a printed list. This wasn't casual neighborhood monitoring. This was methodical documentation designed to build violation cases. Karen moved to the next house, photographing a small garden gnome tucked between 2 bushes, then to another house, documenting a decorative welcome mat that featured a family name. She was building cases against everyone. I followed at a distance as she worked her way through the subdivision. Her targets weren't random. She was specifically documenting anything personal, anything that reflected individual personality or family meaning. Garden decorations, welcome signs, memorial plantings, children's artwork displayed in windows. At the Patel house, she spent extra time photographing a small Diwali decoration that had been left up past the holiday season. At the Murphy house, she documented their St. Patrick's Day flag. Every photo, every note, every violation citation was about removing traces of individual identity from our neighborhood. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't about property values or aesthetic standards. This was about control. Karen was systematically stripping away everything that made our houses feel like homes. I watched her photograph Mrs. Thompson's butterfly garden, planted to honor her daughter who'd died of cancer. Another memorial garden, another family's way of processing grief, another target for Karen's campaign. My hands clenched into fists. As a municipal code inspector, I'd seen plenty of legitimate HOA enforcement. This wasn't it. This was harassment disguised as rule enforcement, targeting the most vulnerable residents with the most meaningful decorations. Karen finished her documentation session and drove away, leaving behind a neighborhood where families were afraid to express themselves, afraid to honor their loved ones, afraid to make their houses feel like homes. I pulled out my phone and started taking my own photos, documenting the empty spaces where personal touches used to be, the sterile conformity that Karen was enforcing through intimidation and threats. As a code inspector, I knew what legitimate authority looked like. I also knew what overreach looked like. And Karen Whitmore's systematic campaign against personal expression, that looked like someone operating way beyond any legitimate HOA authority. This was bigger than just my Dove memorial. This was about protecting our entire community's right to call this place home. That evening, I walked to the community mailbox cluster at the entrance of Pinewood Estates, still processing what I'd witnessed during Karen's documentation spree. The metal boxes stood in a neat row under the streetlight, and I wasn't surprised to find I wasn't the only resident checking mail after work hours. Elena Rodriguez was fumbling with her keys at mailbox 14, dropping them twice before managing to get the small door open. I'd seen her at HOA meetings, always sitting quietly beside Karen, taking notes, rarely speaking up. "Evening, Elena." She jumped at my voice, her mail scattering across the concrete. "Oh, James, you startled me." She knelt quickly to gather the envelopes, her hands visibly trembling. I helped collect her mail, noticing how she avoided eye contact. "Everything okay? You seem a bit—" "Fine, I'm fine," she clutched the mail to her chest, but her voice was anything but convincing. "Just tired from work." "At the county clerk's office, right?" I kept my tone casual, friendly. "Must be interesting work, all those official documents." Elena's face went pale. She glanced around the empty mailbox area like someone might be listening. "Yes, well, paperwork is paperwork." I opened my own mailbox, giving her space but staying close enough to continue the conversation. "I've been thinking about yesterday's interaction with Karen, about the legal documents she served me." Elena's shoulders tensed. She clutched her keys so tightly her knuckles went white. "Elena, can I ask you something? As someone who works with official filings every day, does the HOA's enforcement authority seem legitimate to you? She froze completely, her breathing becoming shallow. For a moment I thought she might bolt. I shouldn't. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm on the board. I have obligations. But you work with municipal documents professionally. You'd recognize proper procedures, proper authority. Elena's hands started shaking again, this time more noticeably. She pressed them against her sides, trying to steady herself. James, I can't. This isn't appropriate. The way Karen's targeting personal memorials, Mrs. Chen's roses, the military displays, my brother's dove, does that seem like legitimate community standards enforcement to you? Elena's composure cracked. No, she whispered, then immediately looked terrified that she'd spoken. I mean, I didn't say that. I can't say that. I kept my voice gentle. Elena, what's eating at you? You look like you haven't slept in days. She leaned against the mailboxes, her professional mask slipping completely. I keep thinking about Mrs. Chen's roses, about your brother's memorial, about all the families Karen's made remove things too. That actually mattered to them. Her voice was getting stronger, but also more distressed. When I took this secretary position, I thought we'd be handling legitimate issues. Noise complaints, property maintenance, actual problems. She rubbed her temples. But she's been targeting anything personal. Anything that makes people's houses feel like homes. Elena glanced around again, then stepped closer to me. James, in my day job, I see HOA documentation all the time. Proper incorporation papers, legitimate authority structures, correct procedures for enforcement actions. Her hands were shaking again, and she clasped them together to hide it. What are you saying, Elena? She took a shuddering breath. I'm saying that when I look at our HOA's filings with fresh eyes, with my professional eyes, there are irregularities. What kind of irregularities? The kind that keep me awake at night, wondering if we actually have the authority to do half the things Karen's been doing. Elena's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The kind that make me question whether our incorporation was ever properly completed. My pulse quickened. As a municipal inspector, I knew exactly what she was implying. Elena, are you saying? I'm saying I can't sleep at night knowing what I know. She clutched her mail tighter. I became an HOA secretary to help my neighbors, not to help Karen strip away everything that makes their houses feel like homes. She hurried toward her car, then stopped and turned back. James, that memorial to your brother? It's beautiful. It should stay exactly where it is. The next morning, I was barely halfway through my coffee when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Karen flanked by two other board members, Robert Hayes and Margaret Sullivan. Karen held an official-looking manila envelope, her expression triumphant. I opened the door, already knowing this wasn't going to be pleasant. Mr. Mitchell, Karen announced loudly, clearly performing for the neighbors who might be watching, I'm here to serve you with formal violation proceedings and financial penalties for your continued non-compliance with HOA aesthetic standards. She thrust the envelope at me with theatrical authority. As of this moment, you owe Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association $500 in immediate fines for unauthorized decorative elements. I opened the envelope and scanned the documents. The legal formatting was still sloppy, but the threats were crystal clear. Additionally, Karen continued, you'll be assessed $50 per day until the violation is corrected. That's $50 every single day, Mr. Mitchell, starting today. Robert Hayes stepped forward, looking uncomfortable but playing his part. The board voted unanimously. This is your final notice before we proceed with collection actions. Collection actions? I kept my voice level, professional. Margaret Sullivan nodded gravely. Property liens, Mr. Mitchell. If you refuse to pay these legitimate fines, we have the authority to place a lien on your home. Eventually that could lead to forced sale to satisfy the debt. Karen's smile was predatory. I researched your property value, James. Nice home. It would be a shame if financial stubbornness cost you everything over a tacky statue. I felt my jaw clench. You're threatening to force the sale of my home over an 18-inch memorial to my deceased brother? I'm enforcing legitimate community standards, Karen shot back. Your personal circumstances don't override HOA authority. The board has absolute discretion over aesthetic violations. Absolute discretion? That's right. Karen's confidence was unshakable. State law grants properly incorporated HOAs broad enforcement powers over community standards. Our authority is backed by the full force of law. I looked at the three board members standing on my porch, threatening to take my home over a memorial to Marcus. The absurdity of it would have been laughable if the financial threat weren't so real. Let me understand this correctly, I said slowly. You're claiming legal authority to fine me $500 immediately, then $50 daily, with the power to place liens on my property and potentially force its sale? Exactly, Karen said. And before you start crying about your brother again, the law doesn't care about your feelings. Rules are rules. Robert Hayes shifted uncomfortably. Karen, maybe we don't need to what, Robert? Enforce the rules we were elected to enforce? Karen's voice rose. Mr. Mitchell thinks his sob story exempts him from community standards. Well, it doesn't. I studied the papers again, noting the legal citations, the procedural claims, the assertions of authority. As a municipal code inspector, I knew what legitimate enforcement looked like. This felt different. You're absolutely certain about your legal standing here? I asked. 100%, Karen declared. Our HOA is properly incorporated, our bylaws are legally binding, and our enforcement authority is absolute within the scope of community standards. Margaret Sullivan nodded. We've consulted legal counsel. Everything we're doing is completely legitimate. Completely legitimate, I repeated. That's right. So you can either remove that statue and pay the $500 fine today, or you can watch the daily penalties accumulate while we prepare lien paperwork. Karen's smile was vicious. Your choice, Mr. Mitchell, but either way, that memorial is coming down. The three of them walked back to their car, leaving me standing on my porch with their ultimatum. $500 immediate penalty, $50 daily until compliance, property liens, forced sale, all over Marcus's Dove Memorial. I looked across my front yard at the small bronze statue catching the morning sunlight, 18 inches tall, quietly honoring my brother's meet. Maury helping me process the grief that still hit me like a freight train some mornings. Karen was threatening to take my home over it. I folded the violation notice and walked back inside, my mind already shifting into municipal inspector mode. Karen claimed absolute authority, complete legal standing, consultation with legal counsel. But Elena's words echoed in my head. Irregularities in the HOA's filings. Questionable incorporation. Procedures that didn't look quite right to someone who worked with official documents every day. If Karen was wrong about her authority, if the HOA's legal foundation was as shaky as Elena suspected, then these threats were empty bluster backed by nothing. Time to find out exactly what kind of authority Karen Whitmore actually had. 2 hours later, I was sitting at my desk in the county courthouse records office, officially on my lunch break, but actually diving deep into municipal incorporation databases. My inspector credentials gave me access to filing records that most people never saw. I started with Pinewood Estates HOA's basic incorporation documents. The first red flag appeared immediately. The initial articles of incorporation filed 8 years ago listed Pinewood Development LLC as the incorporating entity, standard practice for developer-created HOAs. But when I cross-referenced the developer's business license, Pinewood Development LLC had been dissolved 6 months before the HOA incorporation. A dissolved entity couldn't legally incorporate an HOA. I dug deeper, pulling the signature pages. The developer representative's signature was notarized, but when I checked the notary's commission records, that notary's license had expired 2 months before the document was signed. Invalid notarization. My pulse quickened. As a municipal inspector, I'd seen plenty of paperwork errors, but this wasn't sloppy filing. This was fundamed. Ental legal failure. I searched for amendment filings, the documents required when an HOA's board composition changed or bylaws were updated. Karen had been president for 3 years, but I couldn't find any amendments reflecting her election or the current board structure. According to the county's records, the Pinewood Estates HOA was still supposedly governed by the original developer-appointed board from 8 years ago, all employees of a company that no longer existed. I pulled up the property deed restrictions next. Legitimate HOAs derive their authority from deed covenants that run with the land. The restrictions had to be properly recorded against each property deed within the subdivision. Pinewood Estates had 47 homes. I spot-checked a dozen property records. Only 3 showed recorded HOA covenants. The other 9 properties, including my own, had no recorded deed restrictions giving any HOA authority over aesthetic standards, architectural changes, or community rules. I sat back in my chair staring at the computer screen. Karen had threatened to fine me, place liens on my property, potentially force its sale. She claimed absolute authority backed by state law. But according to the official county records, the Pinewood Estates HOA was a legal fiction, improperly incorporated by a dissolved entity, notarized by an expired license, never properly amended, and lacking deed authority over most properties in the subdivision. I printed every document, cross-referenced every filing, verified every signature and date. The pattern was consistent. Procedural failure after procedural failure, creating a house of cards that looked official but lacked any legitimate legal foundation. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor. "Karen's back, photographing your Dove Memorial again, taking measurements." I gathered my paperwork and headed back to my car. Karen was documenting evidence. For her enforcement action, building her case against my memorial with the confidence of absolute authority. She had no idea that her authority didn't exist. As a municipal code inspector, I'd spent years studying the intersection of property law, municipal regulation, and HOA governance. I knew the difference between legitimate authority and bureaucratic theater. Karen Whitmore was running an elaborate performance, threatening families with legal consequences that she had no power to impose. She was collecting fines she couldn't legally assess, threatening liens she couldn't legally file, claiming authority that had never been properly established. The irony was perfect. Karen had targeted my memorial because she assumed I was just another intimidated homeowner who'd fold under legal pressure. Instead, she'd picked a fight with the one person in Pinewood Estates who knew exactly how to verify her claims and had just discovered they were completely false. I thought about Mrs. Chen's demolished rose garden, the Johnson family's removed military display, all the personal touches that families had surrendered to Karen's threats. They'd been bullied into compliance by someone with no legitimate authority to make demands. But now I knew the truth, and that changed everything. I walked into my kitchen that evening to find a certified letter waiting on the counter, hand-delivered while I was at work. The return address made my stomach drop. Pinewood Estates HOA legal proceedings. Inside was a formal court summons. Karen had escalated beyond fines and threats. She was taking me to court. I spread the documents across my kitchen table, my hands trembling slightly as I read the details. Hearing date, March 15th, exactly 1 week away. March 15th. The anniversary of Marcus's death. I pulled out my phone and checked the calendar, hoping I'd misread the date, but there it was, Tiat. The court hearing was scheduled for the exact day that Marcus had died 3 years ago in Afghanistan. On the table beside the court papers sat a framed photo from Marcus's last leave, both of us standing next to his motorcycle in the same kitchen, his arm around my shoulders, that grin that could light up any room. Seeking immediate injunctive relief and monetary damages, the lawsuit read. Respondents' willful violation of community aesthetic standards and continued defiance of legitimate HOA authority. Karen was asking the court to order immediate removal of the Dove Memorial, plus payment of all accumulated fines, plus her legal costs, plus additional punitive damages for flagrant disregard of community standards. I set down the papers and touched Marcus's photo. 3 years ago, I'd gotten the call while sitting in this same kitchen. The Army chaplain's voice, carefully professional, explaining how an IED had taken my little brother on a routine patrol in Helmand Province. The Dove Memorial wasn't just decoration. It was my lifeline to Marcus, my way of keeping him close during the dark days when PTSD made simple tasks feel impossible. The bronze dove caught sunlight the same way Marcus's smile used to light up a room, and Karen wanted to rip it away on the anniversary of his death. I looked at the court summons again, noting the legal language, the procedural claims, the assertions of HOA authority that I now knew were completely false. Karen had made a critical mistake. By taking this to court, she was forcing a judge to examine the legal foundation of her authority. She'd have to prove standing, demonstrate proper incorporation, show legitimate authority to assess fines and demand compliance. She couldn't do any of those things because none of them existed. My research at the courthouse had revealed the truth. The Pinewood Estates HOA was legally meaningless, improperly incorporated, inadequately recorded, lacking authority over most properties in the sub-division. But Karen didn't know that I knew. She thought she was dragging a grieving veteran into court where her legitimate HOA authority would crush his emotional attachment to a memorial statue. Instead, she was about to face a municipal code inspector who'd spent the afternoon documenting her complete lack of legal standing. I gathered Marcus's deployment letters from the kitchen drawer, especially the last one, where he'd written about doves representing peace and hope for coming home. That letter would establish the memorial's profound personal significance and constitutional protection. But more importantly, I had 43 pages of county records proving that Karen's HOA had no authority to regulate anything in our neighborhood. I looked at the court date again, March 15th, the anniversary of losing Marcus. Karen probably thought the timing was coincidental, just another scheduling quirk in an overcrowded court system. She had no idea that she'd just challenged a municipal code inspector to a legal fight on the one day of the year when I had absolutely nothing left to lose. The Dove Memorial would stay exactly where it was, but more than that, by the time this court hearing was over, Karen's entire campaign of neighborhood intimidation would be exposed as the powerless theater it actually was. That evening, I was reviewing my courthouse research when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Elena Rodriguez standing on my porch, clutching a manila folder against her chest and glancing nervously over her shoulder. I opened the door. "Elena, everything okay? Can I come in, please?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. I can't keep doing this." I stepped aside and she hurried past me toward her house next door. "Actually, can we talk at my place? I have documents there that you need to see." 5 minutes later, I was sitting in Elena's living room surrounded by floral wallpaper and family photos while she paced nervously in front of her fireplace. "I haven't slept in 3 days," she said without preamble. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Mrs. Chen crying over those roses. I see your brother's memorial. I see all the families Karen's bullied into removing things that actually mattered to them." Elena stopped pacing and faced me directly. "James, I became HOA secretary because I wanted to help my neighbors. I thought we'd handle legitimate issues, noise complaints, property maintenance, actual problems. But that's not what's been happening." "No," she shook her head vigorously. "Karen's been targeting anything personal, anything that makes people feel at home, and when I try to speak up in board meetings, she shuts me down, says I don't understand the legal complexities." Elena walked to her dining room table and returned with a stack of official documents. "But here's the thing, James. In my day job at the county clerk's office, I process municipal incorporation paperwork every single day. I know what proper documentation looks like." She spread the papers across her coffee table, her hands steadier now that she was moving into professional territory. "These are copies of our HOA's official filings that I pulled during my lunch break today." Elena pointed to the first document. "This is our original Articles of Incorporation, filed 8 years ago by Pinewood Development, LLC. I leaned forward, recognizing the same document I'd found in my courthouse research. "Standard Developer Incorporation," I said. "Except it's not." Elena's voice was getting stronger, more confident. "I cross-referenced the business license database. Pinewood Development, LLC was dissolved 6 months before this incorporation was filed. A dissolved company can't legally incorporate anything." She pulled out another document. "Here's the signature page, notarized by Sandra Martinez, commission number 4447829. Elena looked up at me. "I see. Hecked the notary records personally. Sandra Martinez's commission had expired 2 months before she supposedly notarized this document." My chest tightened with vindication. The same problems I'd discovered, now confirmed by someone with daily access to these systems. "There's more," Elena continued, warming to her subject. "When HOA board composition changes, we're required to file amendments with the county. Karen's been president for 3 years, but look." She showed me a printout from the county database. "No amendments on file. According to official records, our HOA is still governed by the original developer-appointed board from 2016. All employees of a company that no longer exists." "Exactly." Elena was fully animated now, her professional expertise overriding her earlier nervousness. "But the biggest problem is covenant recording. For an HOA to have enforcement authority, the restrictions must be recorded against individual property deeds." She pulled out a thick stack of property searches. "I've been running these during every break this week. 47 homes in Pinewood Estates total. How many have recorded HOA covenants?" 3, James. 3 out of 47. Elena's voice was incredulous. "Your property? No recorded covenants. Mrs. Chen's? Nothing. The Johnsons, the Martinez family, most of the homes Karen's targeting? No HOA authority whatsoever." I sat back in Elena's armchair, processing the confirmation of everything I'd suspected. "Elena, as county clerk, what's your professional assessment of our HOA's legal standing?" She took a deep breath. "Officially, the Pinewood Estates HOA is a legal fiction, improperly incorporated, inadequately recorded, lacking authority over 85% of the properties it claims to govern." "Then why haven't you spoken up before?" Elena's composure wavered. "Because Karen's so confident, so authoritative. She talks about legal counsel, about absolute authority backed by state law. I started doubting my own professional knowledge. But you work with these documents every day. That's exactly why I finally had to speak up. Elena gathered the papers protectively. When I looked at our filings with professional eyes, really looked, I realized Karen's been running an elaborate confidence game. She's terrorizing families with threats she has no legal power to enforce. Elena met my eyes directly. Your court hearing is next week. You deserve to know that Karen's entire case is built on authority that doesn't exist. The next morning, I walked into the municipal building where I'd worked for 6 years, carrying Elena's documents and my own courthouse research. I needed professional confirmation of what I'd discovered, and I knew exactly who to ask. During my lunch break, I knocked on the conference room door where David Chen, no relation to my neighbor, was reviewing zoning appeals. David had been the municipal attorney for 12 years, handling everything from property disputes to HOA and corporation issues. James, good to see you. What brings you to the legal side of the building? I spread Elena's documents and my research across the conference table. David, I need a professional opinion on HOA legal standing, hypothetically speaking. David's eyebrows rose as he examined the papers. This looks very specific for a hypothetical situation. Let's just say I'm being sued by my HOA and want to understand their authority. David studied the incorporation documents, checking dates and signatures with the practiced eye of someone who'd reviewed hundreds of similar filings. After 10 minutes of silent analysis, he looked up. James, whoever filed this incorporation committed multiple procedural violations that would invalidate the entire organization. My pulse quickened. Meaning? Meaning this HOA has no legal standing whatsoever. David pointed to the signature page. Dissolved incorporating entity, expired notary commission, missing required email. Endments, inadequate deed covenant recording. This is HOA Law 101 stuff. He leaned back in his chair. In my professional opinion, any enforcement actions taken by this organization would be legally meaningless. They can't assess fines, can't place liens, can't compel compliance with restrictions. What about their threats of property seizure? David laughed outright. With this incorporation, they couldn't legally seize a parking space. Any court would dismiss their claims immediately once these procedural failures came to light. I felt the tension I'd been carrying for days finally start to ease. So if someone were facing an HOA lawsuit, I'd recommend a two-pronged defense strategy, David said, warming to the legal analysis. First, establish your constitutional rights regarding the disputed item, especially if it's memorial or expressive in nature. Courts are very protective of First Amendment rights and memorial expressions. And second, challenge their legal standing directly. Force them to prove proper incorporation, valid authority, and legitimate enforcement power. Based on these documents, they can't do any of that. David gathered the papers and handed them back to me. James, whoever's being sued by this HOA should know they're facing empty threats from an organization with no legal authority. It's all theater. I shook David's hand. Thanks for the consultation. One more thing, David added as I reached the door. If this HOA has been collecting fines or forcing compliance through these invalid threats, every affected property owner could have grounds for legal action against the board members personally. Walking back to my office, I felt the pieces of my strategy clicking into place. Elena had provided the insider documentation, David had confirmed the legal analysis, and I had Marcus's deployment letter to establish the memorial's constitutio, null significance. Karen thought she was dragging a grieving veteran into court where HOA authority would crush emotional attachment. Instead, she was about to face a municipal code inspector with professional legal consultation, comprehensive documentation, and a constitutional rights argument. But more than that, she was about to have her entire campaign of neighborhood intimidation exposed as legally meaningless theater. I pulled out my phone and called Elena. It's James. I just spoke with our municipal attorney. He confirmed everything you discovered. Everything? David's exact words were that your HOA has no legal standing whatsoever. Any enforcement actions are legally meaningless. Elena's relief was audible through the phone. So we're really doing this? We're really going to stop her? We're going to do more than stop her, Elena. We're going to protect every family in Pinewood Estates from future intimidation. I looked across the municipal building toward the courthouse where I'd be facing Karen in 4 days. She thought she held all the cards. Legal authority, board support, professional counsel. She had no idea that her entire foundation was built on procedural quicksand that would collapse the moment a judge examined it closely. The memorial to Marcus would stay exactly where it was, But more importantly, Mrs. Chen would be able to replant her roses, the Johnson family could restore their military display, and every other family could reclaim the personal touches that made their houses feel like homes. Karen Whitmore's reign of neighborhood terror was about to end. That evening, I transformed my home office into a war room, spreading Elena's documents, my courthouse research, and David's legal analysis across every available surface. The court hearing was in 3 days, and I needed everything organized for maximum impact. I started with Marcus's deployment letter, the emotional foundation of my case. His handwriting was still crisp on the cream-colored paper, dated just 2 weeks before the IED explosion that took his life. "James," the letter began, "I know you worry about me over here, but I found something that brings me peace. There are doves everywhere around our base, and they remind me that even in this chaos there's still beauty and hope. When I see them, I think about coming home, about the peace we'll have when this deployment ends. Save room in your garden for something that captures that feeling, because I'm going to need reminders of peace when I get back." Marcus never made it back, but his words had inspired the bronze dove memorial that now sat in my front yard, catching morning sunlight and providing the daily reminder of peace that he'd requested. I photographed the letter from multiple angles, ensuring the court would have clear copies of Marcus's handwriting and the date that proved its authenticity. Next, I organized Elena's documentation chronologically: the invalid incorporation papers, the expired notary records, the missing amendments, the property searches showing lack of deed authority. Each document was labeled, cross-referenced, and prepared for legal presentation. My courthouse research came next: official county records that corroborated every one of Elena's findings. Together, our documentation painted a comprehensive picture of the HOA's complete lack of legal standing. At 9 p.m., I started making phone calls. "Mrs. Chen, it's James Mitchell. I have some news about the HOA situation that might interest you." "Oh, James, I hope you're not in too much trouble with that lawsuit." "Actually, Mrs. Chen, I think the trouble might be Karen's. Can you tell me, when she forced you to remove your rose garden, did she ever show you documentation of the HOA's authority over landscaping?" "She just handed me a violation notice and said the board had voted." I explained what Elena and I had discovered: the invalid incorporation, the lack of deed authority, the complete absence of legitimate enforcement power. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Are you saying she had no right to make me remove my husband's roses?" "I'm saying she had no legal authority whatsoever, and if my court case goes the way I expect, you might be able to replant that memorial garden." I made similar calls to the Johnson family, the Martinez family, the Williams family, every household that had been forced to remove personal touches under Karen's threats. The response was consistent: anger at being deceived, hope for vindication, and growing support for the court challenge that could restore their right to make their houses feel like homes. By 11 p.m., I had commitments from 8 families to attend the court hearing, providing visible community support and demonstrating the broader impact of Karen's invalid authority. I returned to my evidence organization, creating a presentation timeline that would maximize courtroom impact, establish Marcus's memorial significance first, then systematically dismantle the HOA's claimed authority through documentation that even a non-lawyer could understand. Elena had agreed to testify as an expert witness, using her county clerk credentials to authenticate the procedural violations. David Chen had provided a written legal opinion confirming the HOA's invalid standing. The affected families would demonstrate community impact. I looked at the wall clock, 11:47 p.m. In 65 hours, I'd be sitting across from Karen Whitmore in a courtroom, armed with evidence that would destroy her entire campaign of neighborhood intimidation. She thought she was prosecuting a simple HOA violation case against an emotional veteran who couldn't let go of a memorial statue. Instead, she was walking into a legal ambush that would expose her complete lack of authority and free every family in Pinewood Estates from her arbitrary control. I touched Marcus's letter one more time, feeling the paper that had crossed half the world to reach me. His words about doves and peace had inspired the memorial that started this fight. Tomorrow, those same words would help me finish it. March 15th arrived gray and cold, with the kind of persistent drizzle that made everything look somber. I stood in the courthouse hallway at 8:30 a.m., 30 minutes before my hearing, reviewing my evidence one final time while trying to ignore the significance of the date. 3 years ago, Marcus had died on this exact day, Now I was about to fight for the memorial that honored his memory. The courthouse hallway buzzed with typical morning activity. Lawyers conferring with clients, clerks moving files, families waiting nervously for their cases to be called. I found an empty bench and spread my documents across my briefcase, double-checking that everything was organized for maximum impact. At 8:45, Karen Whitmore swept through the courthouse entrance like she owned the building. She was flanked by a man in an expensive suit who could only be her attorney, plus Robert Hayes and Margaret Sullivan from the HOA board. Karen spotted me immediately and marched over, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. "Mr. Mitchell," she announced loudly enough for everyone in the hallway to hear, "I hope you've come to your senses and are ready to settle this matter reasonably." I looked up from my paperwork. "Good morning, Karen. I'm ready for our hearing." Her attorney stepped forward, extending his hand. "Thomas Bradley, representing the HOA. Mr. Mitchell, my client is prepared to offer you one final opportunity to resolve this matter without the expense and embarrassment of public proceedings. What kind of resolution did you have in mind?" Karen's smile was predatory. "Remove the statue, pay the accumulated fines, we're up to $850 now, and we'll consider the matter closed. And if I decline? Then we'll be asking the judge for injunctive relief, additional punitive damages for your frivolous defense, and accelerated collection procedures," Bradley said smoothly. "Frankly, Mr. Mitchell, you're facing a losing battle against legitimate HOA authority." I gathered my documents and closed my briefcase. We'll see about that. At 8:55, Elena Rodriguez appeared in the courthouse entrance, looking nervous but determined. She carried a folder of documents and walked directly toward me, ignoring Karen's surprised stare. "Elena?" Karen's voice rose. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to testify, Karen." Elena's voice was steadier than I'd expected. "As county clerk and HOA secretary, I have professional obligations to ensure accurate information is presented to the court." Karen's face went white. "Testify about what?" "About the HOA's incorporation status. About our legal authority to assess fines and enforce restrictions." Elena met Karen's gaze directly. "About the procedural violations I've discovered in our official filings." Bradley frowned. "Ms. Rodriguez, as HOA secretary, you have fiduciary duties to the association. Testimony contrary to the board's interests could constitute a breach of—" "My fiduciary duty is to ensure the HOA operates within legal boundaries," Elena interrupted. "And based on my professional analysis of our incorporation documents, we've been operating outside those boundaries." Karen's composure cracked. "Elena, you're making a serious mistake. The board has absolute authority, backed by legal counsel and state law." "No, Karen, the board has no authority at all." Elena's voice carried the confidence of professional expertise. "And I'm going to explain why to the judge." At 9 o'clock sharp, the bailiff called our case. Pinewood Estates HOA versus Mitchell. As we filed into the courtroom, I caught sight of the gallery filling with familiar faces. Mrs. Chen, the Johnson family, the Martinez family, and others from the neighborhood. They'd come to witness the confrontation that could restore their right to personal expression in their own homes. Karen took her seat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by her attorney and board members. She looked supremely confident, surrounded by the trappings of official authority. I sat at the defendant's table with my briefcase full of evidence, Elena beside me as my witness, and Marcus's deployment letter in my jacket pocket. The judge entered and we rose. Judge Patricia Morrison had a reputation for no-nonsense proceedings and careful attention to legal technicalities. "This matter involves an HOA seeking injunctive relief and monetary damages for alleged violation of community aesthetic standards," Judge Morrison began. "Mr. Bradley, you may present your case." As Bradley stood to begin his opening argument about HOA authority and community standards, I felt a calm certainty settle over me. Karen thought she was about to watch judicial authority crush my emotional attachment to a memorial statue. Instead, she was about to watch her entire campaign of neighborhood intimidation collapse under the weight of her own procedural failures. "Your Honor," Bradley began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to winning, "this is a straightforward case of willful violation of established community standards. The defendant has refused repeated requests to remove an unauthorized decorative element that violates clearly stated HOA aesthetic guidelines." Judge Morrison nodded. "And what is the nature of this decorative element?" "A bronze statue, approximately 18 inches tall, placed in the defendant's front garden without Architectural Review Committee approval." "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Morrison addressed me directly, "how do you respond to these allegations?" I stood, feeling the weight of Marcus's letter in my jacket pocket. Your Honor, I'd like to begin by establishing the nature and significance of what the plaintiff calls a decorative element. I pulled out Marcus's deployment letter, my hands steady despite the emotional weight of reading his words aloud in court. This is a letter written by my brother, Marine Corporal Marcus Mitchell, 2 weeks before he was killed by an IED in Afghanistan. My voice carried clearly through the courtroom. With the court's permission, I'd like to read a relevant passage. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Proceed. I unfolded the letter, noting Karen's uncomfortable shift in her seat. James, I know you worry about me over here, but I found something that brings me peace. There are doves everywhere around our base, and they remind me that even in this chaos, there's still beauty and hope. When I see them, I think about coming home, about the peace we'll have when this deployment ends. Save room in your garden for something that captures that feeling, because I'm going to need reminders of peace when I get back. The courtroom was completely silent. Marcus never made it home, Your Honor. The bronze dove memorial in my front yard honors his memory and provides the daily reminder of peace that he specifically requested. It's not decoration, it's a constitutionally protected memorial expression and a medically necessary part of my PTSD treatment as recommended by my VA therapist. Judge Morrison made notes. Mr. Bradley, does the HOA dispute the memorial nature of this item? Your Honor, while we sympathize with Mr. Mitchell's loss, personal circumstances don't override legitimate community standards. HOAs have broad authority to enforce aesthetic restrictions regardless of individual emotional attachments. That brings us to the central issue, I said. The plaintiff's claimed authority to enforce any restrictions whatsoever. I opened my briefcase and pulled out Elena's documentation. Your Honor, I'd like to challenge the plaintiff's legal standing to bring this action. Karen's attorney looked puzzled. Your Honor, the Pinewood Estates HOA is a properly incorporated homeowners association with full authority. Actually, it's not. I handed copies of my evidence to the bailiff for distribution. Elena Rodriguez, the HOA secretary and a county clerk with expertise in municipal incorporation, will testify that the plaintiff organization lacks any legitimate legal foundation. Judge Morrison examined the documents. Ms. Rodriguez, please take the stand. Elena walked to the witness stand with visible nervousness that transformed into professional confidence as she was sworn in. Ms. Rodriguez, what is your occupation? I'm a county clerk specializing in municipal incorporation and property records, Your Honor. I also serve as secretary for the Pinewood Estates HOA. And what have you discovered about the HOA's incorporation status? Elena's voice steadied. Multiple procedural violations that invalidate the organization's legal standing. The incorporating entity, Pinewood Development LLC, was dissolved 6 months before filing the Articles of Incorporation. The notarization was performed by an expired license. Required amendments were never filed. Most critically, only 3 of 47 properties in the subdivision have recorded deed covenants granting any HOA authority. Judge Morrison looked at Bradley. Counsel, how do you respond to these allegations? Bradley was clearly caught off guard. Your Honor, I'd need time to research these claims. I can authenticate every document, Elena continued. As county clerk, I have direct access to incorporation records, notary commissions, and property deed databases. The evidence shows this HOA was never properly established and lacks legal standing to enforce restrictions on most properties in the subdivision. Judge Morrison studied the documentation for several minutes. The courtroom remained silent except for the shuffling of papers. Mr. Bradley, absent proper incorporation and deed authority, on what legal basis does your client claim enforcement power over Mr. Mitchell's property? Bradley consulted hastily with Karen, who was visibly agitated. Your Honor, we may need to request a continuance to address these procedural questions. No continuance necessary, Judge Morrison said firmly. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds that the plaintiff organization lacks legitimate legal standing to enforce community restrictions. The Articles of Incorporation are invalid due to procedural violations, and the defendant's property shows no recorded deed covenants granting HOA authority. Karen shot to her feet. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. We've been operating as a legitimate HOA for 8 years. We have board meetings, collect dues, enforce standards, none of which creates legal authority in the absence of proper incorporation, Judge Morrison replied. Furthermore, Mr. Mitchell's memorial clearly constitutes protected expression under the First Amendment. The judge looked directly at me. Mr. Mitchell, your memorial will remain exactly where it is. All fines assessed by the plaintiff are hereby deemed invalid and unenforceable. Additionally, this court finds that the HOA's enforcement actions against other residents were conducted without legal authority. I felt a surge of vindication that was both professional and deeply personal. This case is dismissed with prejudice. The plaintiff organization is enjoined from further enforcement actions until proper legal standing is established. As the gavel fell, I looked back at the gallery filled with neighbors who'd been bullied into compliance by Karen's empty threats. Mrs. Chen was crying with relief. The Johnson family was embracing justice through both emotional truth and legal precision, exactly what Marcus would have wanted. The courthouse steps felt different walking out than they had walking in. Behind me, Karen Whitmore was arguing frantically with her attorney, while Elena Rodriguez was surrounded by grateful neighbors asking questions about reclaiming their personal touches. The March drizzle had stopped, and afternoon sunlight was breaking through the clouds. Mrs. Chen reached me first, tears streaming down her cheeks. "James, does this mean I can replant my roses?" "It means Karen never had the authority to make you remove them in the first place," I replied, feeling the weight of professional vindication mixed with personal victory. Every violation notice she ever issued was legally meaningless. The Johnson family approached next, their teenage son bouncing with excitement. "Dad, can we put our flag display back up?" "We can put up anything we want, son. We always could. We just didn't know it." One by one, the families Karen had terrorized into compliance gathered around me on the courthouse steps. The Martinez family asked about their hand-painted address sign. The Williams family wanted to restore their garden stones. The Patel family wondered about their Diwali decorations. Each question represented a small piece of personal identity that Karen had stripped away through fraudulent authority. Each answer I gave restored a family's right to make their house feel like home. Elena finished her conversation with the neighbors and walked over to me. "Zhao? Mez, I can't thank you enough. I've been losing sleep for months, knowing something was wrong but not having the courage to speak up. You found the courage when it mattered most. None of this would have been possible without your documentation." She smiled, looking lighter than I'd seen her since this whole ordeal began. What happens to the HOA now? If residents want community governance, they'll need to start over with proper incorporation, recorded deed covenants, and legitimate procedures. But no more arbitrary enforcement of personal preferences disguised as community standards. By the time I drove back to Pinewood Estates, the transformation was already beginning. The Johnson family was reinstalling their military flag display. Mrs. Chen was at the garden center loading flats of memorial roses into her car. Children were hanging handmade artwork back in front windows. The neighborhood was coming alive again with individual personality and family meaning. I pulled into my driveway as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across my front yard. The bronze dove memorial sat exactly where it belonged, catching the golden light the same way Marcus's smile used to illuminate any room he entered. I walked over to the statue and pulled out his deployment letter, reading his words again in the fading daylight. "Save room in your garden for something that captures that feeling, because I'm going to need reminders of peace when I get back." Marcus never made it back from Afghanistan, but his words had guided me through the darkest period of my grief and now through the fight to protect his memory. The Dove Memorial would remain in my front yard, honoring his request for reminders of peace while serving as a symbol of victory over arbitrary authority. As a municipal code inspector, I'd used my professional expertise to expose Karen's fraudulent claims and protect every family in our community. As Marcus's brother, I'd fought to preserve the memorial that kept his memory alive in my daily life. The combination had been more powerful than Karen's confidence, more legitimate than her threats, more enduring than her campaign of intimidation. Across the neighborhood, porch lights were coming on, illuminating restored decorations and personal touches that families were already beginning to reinstall. Garden gnomes returned to their spots between bushes. Welcome mats featuring family names reappeared on front porches. Wind chimes began their peaceful tinkling in the evening breeze. Drop a like if you've ever had to fight bureaucratic bullies who thought they could crush your personal connections to home and family. The Dove Memorial felt warm under my hand, holding the day's heat as darkness settled over Pinewood Estates. In the distance I could hear Mrs. Chen watering her newly planted memorial roses, their fragrance already beginning to drift through the evening air. Marcus had written about doves representing peace and hope. Tonight, that peace extended beyond my front yard to every family in our community who could finally express their love, their memories, and their identity without fear of arbitrary punishment. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.